Hello, and welcome to Leeds Echoes. In this series, I'll be exploring different aspects of Leeds' rich history. Each episode, I'll tell a different story, whether it's a particular building, an entire industry, a lost transportation network. But most importantly, I want to try and figure out how the people that lived and breathed this history felt. What did the local butcher think? Or your neighbour? What did the city sound like? And what did it smell like? These are the kind of things I really want to explore in this series, and I'm really excited where the journey's going to take me. Hopefully I'll see some of you on the way. That beautiful sound you're hearing is Arnold Loxham playing the Wurlitzer organ in the Odeon in Leeds. He played it regularly from 1962 to 1968. Now you might be asking what this has to do with cinema, or thinking that the state-of-the-art 10-screen luxury multiplex Odeon at the Springs Thorpe Park retail outlet in Leeds doesn't have a Wurlitzer organ. Well, Arnold isn't in the multiplex. He's in Leeds' first Odeon, on the Head Row, inside a beautiful Grade 2 listed building designed by Frank Verity and Samuel Beverley, and adhering to Sir Reginald Blomfield's uniform neo-Baroque style implemented on much of the Head Row. This cinema had one screen, enough seats for 2,556 people in stalls and circle levels, and featured the fourth largest Wurlitzer organ in Europe. To try and better understand these facts, the first thing you need to do is completely change the lens through which you look at cinemas. Going to the movies in 1932 when the Odeon first opened as the Paramount Theatre was a completely different experience, and it was driven by circumstances that are easy to forget. In 1932, no one had a television. The UK's first regular television broadcast didn't start until 1936, and there was like 30 minutes worth of content a day on just one channel. BBC Two didn't appear until 1964. So the cinema wasn't just a source of entertainment. Through the Second World War, right up to the 60s, it was a primary source of news for most people. Certainly the only place they could witness the stories of the day actually move. They acted as mass daycare centres for children on weekends, allowing parents to shop in peace. Dedicated children's cinemas littered the city, like the News Theatre, nestled inside the Queen's Hotel, which is itself essentially sat on top of Leeds train station, which, fascinatingly, is actually sat on top of an even older train station buried within the dark arches, but that's a whole other episode. They were essentially all one screen, a reflection of the sheer lack of content available compared to the petabytes worth of visual entertainment now easily accessible from your bed. They were noisy. They were often incredibly smoky. I've spoken to many people who bittersweetly recall being unable to see the picture through the dense cloud of tar and nicotine hanging between them. Some of them were grand and palatial, like the Odeon, with circle seating, bespoke gilded interiors that today we'd more readily associate with the theatre. But that's the thing. There wasn't this clear line between theatre and cinema. The latter being born out of the former, their worlds still readily overlapped. They do still, of course, today, but it's important to remember just how blurry or even non-existent any separation was between them nearly a century ago. Despite films gaining their own independent sound as early as the 1920s, many cinemas still hosted organists or bands to play along with the films right up until the late 60s. Why? because it was part of the experience. Modern technology is still in its very infancy. International travel and foreign holidays were a rarity, even for the elite. The choices people had in terms of where to put their expendable income were very different. And the cinema represented a sensory experience that people couldn't find elsewhere. And often, it offered it during times that were otherwise incredibly bleak. I think importantly, it offered the first real glimpse at the potential of mass shared experience in terms of entertainment. Millions of people across the country were able to share something in a time before easy mass communication, before the internet, before YouTube. There was the Picture House, where for the price of admission, anyone from any walk of life could experience something equally, something they could discuss later that evening with their partner, something the next day at work with their colleagues, something other than war or poverty or strife or suffering. The introduction of talking pictures in the 1920s sparked a frenzy, much like the mass introduction of the internet in the late 90s. It was time for cinema's golden age, which sadly are always doomed to end. The construction and running of local picture houses represented a potent investment opportunity which many people who could seized upon. Within a decade, Leeds was littered with cinemas, over 80 of them, from the grand to the, well, improvised. The Tin Tabernacle in Horsforth, officially known as the Imperial Picture House, not to be confused with Leeds' other Imperial Picture House on Kirkstall Road, was essentially a large agricultural shed on a field just off Town Street with a projector in it. This new and highly popular activity, which essentially saw large groups of often working class people spending prolonged time in small spaces, often presented some more unsavoury experiences. Access to clean bathing water and clean clothes wasn't quite the standard it is today, and I'll lead you to decide for yourselves why Burley Road Cinema was often called the Burley Bug Hutch. After 5 decades of boom, the decline was swift and brutal. The rapid evolution of technology and culture led to sudden and huge drops in patronage. People had TV, then VHS, then DVD. By the time the internet showed up in the 90s, Leeds' cinema network was down to a skeleton of its former self. Even if you did still go to the cinema, as I often did as a child in the 90s, the experience was wildly different. It was always a multiplex. It always felt very American and modern, a cross between an airport and a shopping mall overflowing with overpriced popcorn. Not a Wurlitzer in sight. The Great Odeon on Headrow finally closed its doors as a cinema in 2001, the final blow being dealt by the multiplex opening mere yards up the street in the Light Shopping Centre that's today part of the View cinema chain. The building was originally slated to become an apartment and leisure complex, but was almost immediately purchased by Primark and gutted into a 3-story clothes store. Today it still stands as a Sports Direct, and you can still walk through its front doors and gaze up at the empty space of air conditioning units and cable trunking and imagine what was. Thankfully, the beautiful Wurlitzer organ had long since been removed and safely relocated to the Thursford Collection in Norfolk. Arnold Loxham, who opened the show for us today, was one of the last people to make it sing. But what if I told you you could still experience nearly everything I've talked about today? What if you live in Leeds, that you could step out of your door on a warm summer's evening and from Burley and Kirkstall, Hyde Park or Headingley, take a short walk to a small but beautiful, modest building on Brudenell Road where time has stood still for over a century, where despite every challenge and obstacle imaginable, you can still sit on a red velvet seat in a gaslit room surrounded by your neighbours, and laugh and cry at the best and worst that Hollywood and beyond has to offer. Well, you can. Hyde Park Picture House is one of the most elegant and adorable anomalies that has ever existed. It is the little picture house that could. In its 116 years of existence, the cinema has nearly permanently operated at a loss financially. It has faced closure nearly its entire existence, yet despite this, it's survived. eventually ending up in the very capable hands of the Leeds Grand Theatre and Opera House Company, and current global restrictions aside, it's thriving. Due to have its first ever refurbishment and extension as soon as the current terrible movie we're all currently stuck living rolls its final credits. There are numerous reasons you could postulate as to why this cinema in particular survived. Some will say it's simply mere coincidence. Some of them had to. I feel this is the right opportunity to give a very honourable nod to Cottage Road Cinema, also in Leeds, another survivor of the slaughter. But there's just something about Hyde Park. If you've ever been, you'll know. It's infectious. It lights my imagination on fire every time I step through its doors. Every time I see its ornate Grade 2 listed gas lamp stood proudly outside the front of the building come into view as I walk up Brudenell Road, I feel as if time begins to rewind. By the time I'm inside, it's the 7th of November 1914, and its first ever screening, Their Only Son, is about to begin. After a lot of time in Leeds Central Library researching, I discovered something about the cinema's past that I'd like to think has ensured its survival. Hyde Park Picture House was an accident. The original building was designed and built in 1906 by Thomas Wynne and Sons, a prominent commercial architect in Leeds responsible for several other examples of outstanding architecture in the city. From what I can tell from old directory listings, this new building replaced a large house called Fern Royd. This shows up exactly in the spot around 1900 and is occupied by Ralph Hopton, British surgeon, member of the Royal College of Surgeons and London Royal College of Physicians. Most doctors at the time operated out of their homes, so essentially it was the local doctor's office. Anyway, the construction of the current building, well, most of it, began in 1906 and was done at the request of Leeds hotel owner called Henry Childs. Henry owned the Mitre Hotel on Commercial Street in the city centre. The building still exists today as part of Berry's Jewellers, next door to Carphone Warehouse. Now, Henry made several applications over the early 1900s to Leeds Corporation to move his hotel from Commercial Street to a newly built establishment on Brudenell Road that he intended to call the Paragon. He was refused on several occasions for numerous reasons. I think that in his frustration and at the hope of forcing things in his favour, he proceeded to build the hotel anyway. After again being refused, the building appears from around 1909 onwards in the Leeds directories as Brudenell Road Social and Recreation Club. Then in 1913, the building disappears from the directories for exactly 1 year. The house immediately to the right of the picture house, number 73 Brudenell Road, also disappears. It looks as though the current owners saw greater potential in the building as a cinema and converted it, swallowing the attached number 73 in the process. Brudenell Road Social and Recreation Club then reappears a few hundred feet away on Queen's Road, and in 1914 Hyde Park Picture House appears for the first time, nestled in between the lines "Here is Queen's Road" and number 75 Brudenell Road in the directory listings. And so it is that the picture house that never was is here, against all the odds, against all the change. And once again, for the 1,000,000th time, the cinema teeters on the brink of disaster. The current world situation has hit this national treasure particularly hard. Their upcoming refurbishment put on hold, as well as the exciting and extensive programme of community events they had planned as part of their On the Road project, which was due to run while the refurbishments took place. I urge you, I implore you, do not let it go. The minute you are able to safely, I urge you to go and experience something wondrous, something truly unique. I urge you to be an active participant in history, to ensure that the little picture house that could still does for another century. Thank you so much for listening to another episode of Leeds Echoes. If you liked it, let me know, and hopefully there'll be some more soon. Take care. Stay safe.